Hey everyone, yeah, come in, come in. Yeah, good to see you. You're looking well. Why don't you grab a seat up front and get a drink? We're about to get started. Because, yes, there is a show. It's all been happening, and now you want to know. But before we can start, we must begin with hello. My name is Sean, your host and fellow. Now grab hold your beverage, your mind just as quick. We're building up for our best sip. So join me now for the greatest pleasure where we unwind this world together. It's time now. It's time for the sip. Let's do it now. Let's do it quick. Go! Ah, yes, that's exactly what I needed. Well, workers at an IKEA in eastern Poland were a little surprised when they found an unexpected railway wagon delivery parked next to the Flatpack superstore. Upon closer inspection, workers realized that the contents were actually 240 anti-tank mines that somehow lost their way. After giving the army a call and saying, "Hey, why don't you come and get your mines?" It apparently still took over a week for them to collect. I guess that's what happened when government bureaucracy collides with Swedish meatballs. The general and several other of his admin staff are now on admin leave, pending further inquiries. On the plus side, parking spaces have been really easy to come by the last few months. Meanwhile, the UK could adopt single market rules under new legislation. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer plans to introduce the legislation in the King's Speech on May 13th, granting ministers power to adopt European rules on food standards and animal welfare without full parliamentary votes. Aiming to deliver a food and drink trade deal worth £5 billion annually, the government intends to use the dynamic alignment to slash red tape for British exporters and manufacturers seeking access to European markets. The legislation utilises so-called Henry VIII powers, enabling ministers to implement EU regulations via secondary legislation, a process that typically bypasses parliamentary amendments and official votes by MPs. So the UK is one of the original EU countries, and it was signed up to all the conventions and all the governance that entails. That changed in the UK when they decided to break away from the EU, Brexit, I'm sure you all know. And that was formalised in January 2020. So even though the headlines sound like it's all complete and done, there is actually a number of ways that the UK is still actually tied to the EU through things like the Human Rights Conventions. The proposal here is to use laws introduced by Henry VIII to amend legislation without it needing to go through Parliament. The term comes from Henry VIII, King Henry VIII, in the 1530s. 1539, he pushed through a statute of proclamations, which let him make laws by royal decree, with the same force as an act of Parliament and bypassing full parliamentary approval. What that means is that there is now primary legislation and secondary legislation. And primary legislation, it goes to the Parliament and ministers are allowed to debate and change the legislation. Secondary legislation was introduced by the then King, as a backstop override, so he can effectively set whatever legislation he wanted. The secondary legislation can simply be read out in Parliament. You're not allowed to debate it. There's no amendments allowed. You can just say yes or no at the end of the process. The language is the most interesting part here. When you hear primary, you kind of think, oh, it's like the main thing. That's the most important part. And meanwhile, it's the secondary legislation that actually has the blank check and it has all the power. It's not really the headline grabbing big changes, but it's a subtle steer that is applied to the legislation after the fact, and no one's allowed to challenge that. So it's interesting that it's widely known. These are apparently inserted into most primary legislations nowadays. So there's almost always a secondary legislation clause in it, so the government can just amend the rules as they like, which is interesting. Meanwhile, in South Africa, Elon Musk has been causing some controversy with his criticism of the South African government over making Starlink available in the country. South Africa has race laws that prevent white people from fully owning their own business. You can only operate if you gift 30% of your business to a black individual or a black aligned business consortium. That's caused all kinds of problems because any major investment comes with strings attached, and for life, really. This applies even if you're born there. And so, if you're a white person in the country, you can't start and run a business without having to give away 30% of it. It's not the same as if a black person had started a business there, and that is unfair. Back in early March, discussions were strained and still focused on the sticking points of the license requirements, but there were some signs that the government was showing a little bit of flexibility, but they're mostly superfluous. Instead of saying, "Oh, give us 30% of your cash," they wanted 30% of your business invested into other entities. So it's mostly sort of wording changes, really. You're still having to commit a gigantic amount of capital for no real benefit. And then over the next few weeks, Namibia also rejected the license on similar grounds. Only they've got an even higher share, which is 51%, which is pretty nuts. So that can only mean Namibia will lose out on investments and access to, one of the best internet offerings available, I think, at the moment. Last week, Elon made a controversial post. He said, South Africa won't allow Starlink to be licensed, even though I was born there, simply because I am not black. We were offered many times the opportunity to bribe our way to a license by pretending that a black guy will run Starlink, but I have refused to do this on principle. Racism should not be allowed, no matter which race it is applied. Shame on the racist politicians in South Africa. The head of the public diplomacy in SA, Clayson Monyela, responded with something fairly generic about how other US companies aren't having the same problem. But I'm pretty sure that most of those US companies aren't going to be, created and run by a South African entrepreneur. So he's really just ignoring what Elon was saying. When I was growing up in South Africa, the internet didn't really exist, and we used dial-up modem to connect to everything back then. There were various BBSs around the country, as they were called back then. And that allowed me to download new games and books and things, which was pretty amazing, because at the time, your only options were to go down to the shops and buy something, or go to your friend's house and copy something. So to be able to connect over the phone line and get new stuff, almost basically for free, was quite exciting. Things have changed a lot nowadays, but that's kind of where it all started. In time, the internet, the speeds were really, really slow. They were very, very poor, but over time that has improved. The infrastructure in South Africa is more moved towards fibre, but that's really only around the major centres. The rural settings will still struggle to even get a cell phone signal, so there's no chance in those other areas. A country's network also has to be connected to the outside world for the internet to work. And South Africa's links have always been quite a way behind the international standards. The main connection is the cables that will run up the side of the continent. There's only a limited number of them, and everyone is basically sharing those same set of cables. So all businesses, government agencies, the military, the police, everybody there is just going to be using these same set of cables. And Starlink would add a massive uplift to that kind of capacity, because it is a giant mesh network of satellites, basically. So it could join at any point in the country, not just at where those cable points are coming in, but it could actually just provide a backbone anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world at the moment. So I don't know. It is not helping the people on the ground, that's for sure. And for me, the problem is that it's effectively shutting South Africa out of growth. Something South Africa desperately needs at the moment, and unemployment is sitting at 40%, the highest in the world, and government bonds have been downgraded to junk. So it's not clear where all this money and investment is going to come from at the moment. It's kind of turning away these opportunities. It's not going to help people on the ground. It's not going to help South Africa, I don't think. Growth can only really be achieved through private capital. Not to mention the other benefits that Starlink could bring. I mean, as the rural communities have no other way of talking except for the access to the internet. And there are a lot of people out there in the world that will quite happily talk or share or even send money to people that are disadvantaged, and they just simply have no voice at the moment. Nobody knows who they are. They're missing out on quite a lot, I think. Starlink is not the only business that would be holding back. I mean, South Africa has huge potential, but there are many local and international businesses that are going to be put off by these laws. All those jobs, all that capital and all the infrastructure investment, and it's just being held back by these 140 race laws, which explicitly favour people based on their skin. So I think, like many, it started out with good intentions, and there's probably some logic to it at the point, but it's just like a lot of things, it's now turned into something else, and it's starting to hold the country back, I think. So that brings me to the end of my notes, and that leaves me with just a final message to say, which is don't compromise on your ambitions. Keep a clear goal in mind and drive everything around you towards it. It's more important to be directionally correct than 100% perfect. In time, you will see that it will start paying for itself. With that, I wish you well, and please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. See you later.